Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to the final round of the closing argument competition. We've got some truly wonderful advocates this week. I'd like to congratulate all of you and give your top two on your wonderful performances. Before we start, I'd just like to introduce myself and then to say thanks to a few people who've been instrumental with this organization. So firstly, my name is Lauren James, and I am the closing argument competition co-editor. I've also been on two other mock trial teams. I would like to thank Macy Williams, who is my other co-editor for the closing argument competition. I'd also like to thank Victoria Neese, who is the MAC president, and Emily Newberry, who's the mock trial chair. And I'd like to thank a few other students. That would be William Hill, Summer Ortiz, and Brianna Fleming for their work in ensuring that this competition was a success. And then also, I would like to thank all of our judges throughout this week and tonight for being here. But a special thanks to Judge Powers, who runs the Mercer Advocacy Council. And now, as these competitors know, they each have 10 minutes to present. After they present their arguments, the judges will fill out their score sheets. After which, the judges will introduce themselves and give feedback. And during that time, I will be tallying the scores. Then we'll bring the scores back out and the judges will introduce, they will announce who was the winner. And so without further ado, we'll start.
Your Honor, the prosecution would like to request to use the remainder of time for rebuttal. May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Conviction, confinement, concealment. Good evening. My name is Akash Patel. I proudly represent the state of Mercer in today's case against the defendant, Rick Sanchez. First, I would like to thank you for your time and attention throughout today's trial. See, today you were presented with key pieces of evidence and heard from witness testimony that's revealed the truth about what really happened on the night of August 13, 2019. Today, the state has charged the defendant, Rick Sanchez, with kidnapping and felony murder. And that means that we had to prove to you that the defendant intentionally or forcibly confined Summer Smith against her will with the intent to inflict bodily harm. And that throughout the commission of that kidnapping caused the death of Summer Smith. And we had to prove to you these elements beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt is a burden that rests solely with us as the prosecution, but we proudly accept this burden because we're confident that the evidence and testimony that you heard today, well, it only goes to show one thing, that the defendant is responsible for this young girl's death. You see, reasonable doubt is best explained using an analogy. Let's imagine that we have a box. In that box, we put a cat and a mouse. If we seal that box and come back an hour later to only find that the cat is remaining in the box, well, we can use reasonable inferences based off the evidence to determine the fate of that mouse. We can look to pieces of evidence such as the fact that there's no holes in the box, or the fact that there's blood on the floor of the box, or even the fact that the mouse's tail is still hanging out of that cat's mouth. And much like the tail hanging out of that cat's mouth, well, the evidence in this case is clear. It only goes to show that one person could possibly be responsible for the death of Summer Smith. And that person is the defendant. Today, you heard testimony from Jerry Smith. Jerry Smith was the father of the young victim in today's case. Jerry Smith told you about his family, his loving wife, Beth, and his late daughter, Summer, or as she was better known to loved ones, Sunny. He told you how he wanted Summer to dream big and aim high. He wanted Summer to go to his alma mater, Harvard. Unfortunately, Jerry will never get to see his young daughter live out those dreams. Why? It's because on the night of August 13th, 2019, at the hands of the defendant, Summer lost her life. August 13th, 2019. Let me take you back to that night one last time. You see, Jerry Smith told you it was just like any other night for their family. And Jerry came home and they had dinner, They watched a movie together, and at 10 p.m., well, when Summer was done with her homework, she went straight to bed. Little did the Smiths know that this would be the last time that they would ever see their young daughter ever again. Because the next morning when Jerry woke up, well, he yelled out for Summer. He waited for Summer to come downstairs, and she didn't because she wasn't even home. You see, like any worried parent would, Jerry picked up the phone immediately. He called the police. And that's where Detective Gribbles came. Today you heard from Detective Gribbles, the lead investigator. She told you how she collected DNA evidence, blood samples, witness statements, fingerprints, anything that could help lead the investigation to determine what had happened that night to Summer. She told you how that investigation took her to the defendant's home. You see, the defendant, he was known by police. He was known because he has a criminal history. He is a registered sex offender. And today you saw that sex offender registration form. Now, Mr. Jerry, let's take a closer look at that form. It says that the defendant was convicted of raping a 15-year-old girl. A 15-year-old girl, not too much unlike Summer was. You see, the defendant that day, when the police came knocking on his door, well, he refused to cooperate with the police. He refused to provide any statements, provide any evidence that could help lead to what had happened to Summer. He concealed the facts, ladies and gentlemen. It was only when Detective Gribbles was able to get into the defendant's home, where she was able to look for evidence, that she saw that there was blood in the defendant's basement. A crime lab analysis of that blood showed you today that it belonged to none other than the victim, 14-year-old Summer Smith. Members of the jury, Summer Smith was in the defendant's basement bleeding. A further crime lab analysis of the defendant's motorhome showed that the same blood samples were there too. The victim was bleeding in the defendant's motorhome. In fact, not only was her blood there, we also found fingerprints. Fingerprints belonging to two people, the victim and the defendant. Members of the jury, next time that Summer was seen is when her body was discovered about a mile outside of town. She was tied up. She was gagged. She was confined. Her body was left to rot in the middle of the desert. And next to that body, tire tracks. Tire tracks that were confirmed by the lab to belong to the motorhome of the defendant. The same motorhome with the victim's blood in it, the same motorhome with the defendant's fingerprints in it. The defendant used that motorhome to confine Summer Smith, drive her out into the middle of nowhere, and drop her body to decompose. And then he had to conceal that evidence. And so he tried to. You see, the defendant, he lied to you today. He told you at the middle of the night on August 13th while he was sleeping in bed, when in reality, he was trying to hide the motorhome. He parked that motorhome, in fact, at a 7-Eleven gas station here, immediately between where Summer's body was found and the defendant's home. You see, the defendant, he claims he was sleeping, but in fact, he made one crucial mistake that night. He walked into that 7-Eleven. He walked in and he asked the clerk, is there any buses that go into town? See, the clerk, she found that odd. She found what an odd question for someone to ask at 3 o'clock in the morning. It allowed her to remember exactly what the defendant looked like. And so much so that a couple days later, when Detective Gribble showed her a photo pack of a listed number of people, well, she was able to positively identify as the defendant as someone who was in that gas station next to where the body was discovered on the night of August 13th. Members of the jury, the defendant has lied to you. He tells you that there was another person there to confirm his alibi. He tells you that Morty Harmon was there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're here throughout today's trial. Where is Morty Harmon? Well, I'll tell you this right now. After a thorough FBI manhunt, Morty Harmon, he does not exist. He was simply fabricated by the defendant to create an alibi. Let's analyze that alibi, shall we? The defendant claims that the Summer Smith came to his home that night. She was already bleeding. He was just trying to help her. If the defendant wanted to help Summer Smith, why didn't he take her to the hospital that night? If the defendant wanted to help Summer Smith, Why didn't he call the police that night? If this defendant wanted to help Summer Smith, why didn't he tell her parents when they were worried the morning they figured out she was missing? It's because he didn't want to help her. That night, a registered sex offender saw his opportunity with a young, defenseless young girl. He confined her in his basement. He drove her out in his motorhome where she bled to the middle of nowhere, dropped her body off, left to decompose, and tried to conceal the evidence from you. Members of the jury, I ask you to look to this. DNA evidence, blood, fingerprints, witness statements from someone who actually saw the defendant that night. Look to these pieces of evidence and find that the defendant is the only person that has the motive and the opportunity to carry out such a heinous crime. I want you to find justice and truth for a young girl who lost her life that night. Return the only verdict that speaks to truth. Find the defendant guilty of all charges. Thank you.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Helping others is a cure, not just for those in need, but for your own soul. These are the words that were embodied by Rick Sanchez on the night of August 13, 2019, when he opened his door to discover young Summer Smith standing there, hurt, scared, and desperate. Now, after serving penance for a crime he committed years ago, he saw in Summer a second chance to make the right decisions. He saw in Summer a chance for redemption. And that night, he helped Summer in her hour of need. But tragically, later that night, Summer was abducted and killed. Now, the prosecution is trying to convince you that by convicting Rick Sanchez, you are getting justice for Summer. But the prosecution is wrong. If you convict Rick Sanchez, you will actually be convicting the one person that night that was trying to help her. It's true that Rick Sanchez is a convicted sex offender, but the truth is always obscured if it's not viewed in its full context. Rick Sanchez's registration form shows that he was convicted in 1982, which means that he was 19 years old. And he was a 19-year-old who slept with someone 4 years younger. And that doesn't justify his actions. But he has been trying to rehabilitate himself ever since. He has followed the rules of registering with his community. He has peacefully settled into his neighborhood. And he hasn't had a criminal offense in 31 years. Now, the prosecution is trying to make Rick Sanchez seem like some sort of vicious child predator. But that's not who he is. He wasn't some old man who was fixated on minors. He was a teenager that made a bad decision. And it is also true that Summer's blood was found in Rick Sanchez's home, and her fingerprints were found inside the motorhome. But again, we need to look at the full context. Summer came to Mr. Sanchez's house that night, bloodied and bruised from a beating that her father gave her earlier that day. And Mr. Sanchez, seeing a hurt child in desperate need of help, fleeing from danger, gave her sanctuary. He allowed her to stay in his motorhome, which is parked in the driveway, far away from where he was sleeping. Now, Summer's father, Jerry Smith, claims he never laid a hand on her. But the mother of Summer's friend, Trisha Long, frequently heard Summer describe the various beatings that she endured at the hands of her father. That night, Rick Sanchez was being visited by Morty Harmon. And in his testimony, Mr. Sanchez stated that Morty Harmon is a nurse who tended to Summer's wounds. Now, the prosecution wants you to believe that Morty Harmon doesn't exist, but the evidence shows otherwise. Using FBI resources, the police were able to find a registered nurse by the name of Morty Harmon living in Reno, Mercer. Now, if Morty Harmon doesn't exist, then how did Mr. Sanchez magically create a fictional character that just so happened to have the same occupation, first name, and last name of a real person who lives in this state? Either Morty Harmon is real or Mr. Sanchez has some psychic ability. Furthermore, the evidence shows that Morty Harmon was there that night. The clerk at the 7-Eleven where the motorhome was abandoned stated that someone came in asking for buses into town. A map created by Detective Gribbles shows that Reno is a town that's on the same highway as that very 7-Eleven. And who do you know lives in Reno? That's right, Morty Harmon. Now, if you look at Jerry Smith and Morty Harmon together, a very insidious plan begins to reveal itself. The email that was sent that night appears to have come from Summer Smith, but Summer was not allowed to use the computer for email purposes. And at the risk of another beating, she definitely was not going to break that rule. What likely happened that night is that after beating her, Jerry Smith sent his daughter to Mr. Sanchez's house, and then he got on the computer and sent this email that said, "I'm going to Rick's." At that point, Morty Harmon, who was already in Mr. Sanchez's house, had access to Summer and the motorhome, took the motorhome, abducted Summer to the middle of the desert, and killed her. Now, why would Jerry send that email? And why would Morty use the motorhome to commit the crime? That's because Summer Smith had a $250,000 life insurance policy. And you cannot collect on that policy unless she's dead. Who better to frame than the one person in the neighborhood that had to register as a sex offender? Today, you have the task of determining whether Rick Sanchez is guilty of kidnapping and murder. A person is guilty of kidnapping if they forcibly abduct another person with the intent to either A, inflict bodily harm, or B, commit a felony. Rick Sanchez in no way took Summer without her against her will. Summer came to his home and voluntarily stayed in his motorhome. Furthermore, Rick Sanchez had no reason to kidnap her or cause her bodily harm. Because of Rick Sanchez's past sexual crime, the prosecution wants you to believe that he was fixated on Summer. But the crimes against Summer had nothing to do with sex. A person is guilty of first-degree murder if they intentionally kill another person or B, commit a clearly dangerous felony that ultimately leads in somebody's death. Rick Sanchez had no motive to hurt Summer. As a matter of fact, he wasn't even trying to be near her because of her legal status. The only reason that Summer Smith was in his motorhome was because Rick Sanchez was being a good Samaritan. Jerry Smith, on the other hand, has already collected the insurance on Summer's body, and he already has the money for her death. And Morty Harmon was in the position to make that death happen. Jerry Smith had the motive to kill her, and Morty Harmon had the opportunity to kill her. And together, they sacrificed an innocent 14-year-old girl and framed a vulnerable man. Now, the prosecution has given you an analogy for probable cause, but the prosecution has made one critical error. It doesn't account for the other two suspects. Yes, if you have a cat and a mouse in a box and you open it up and the mouse is gone, you can conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that the cat ate the mouse. But what if you have 3 cats in the box and you open up the box and the mouse is gone? Can you reasonably conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that the first cat was the one that ate it when there was 2 other cats in the box? No, you can't. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 2 other cats in this box, and that is Jerry Smith and Morty Harmon. It is with Jerry Smith and Morty Harmon that motive and opportunity meet each other, and they are the likely culprits of this crime. The prosecution has failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Rick Sanchez had anything to do with the kidnapping and murder of Summer. If you find Rick Sanchez guilty today, you will not only be taking away his freedom, but also his chance for redemption. You'll be taking away the second chance that he was hoping for when he helped Summer. If you find Rick Sanchez guilty today, you will have participated in working a great injustice in this courtroom today. And that is why I urge you to find Rick Sanchez not guilty of the kidnapping and murder of Summer Smith.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Members of the jury, bench just came before you and gave a list of red herrings. Try to formulate this convoluted conspiracy that possibly Jerry Smith and this so-called Morty Harmon were working together to kidnap and murder Summer. But let's look to the evidence, shall we? Look to the fact that it was the defendant's home where blood was found. Look to the fact that it was the defendant's fingerprints in the motorhome. Look to the fact that there were tire tracks belonging to the defendant's vehicle at the scene of the crime. Members of the jury, Morty Harmon does not exist. He's merely a fictional character made up by the defendant using a common name. That's why we ask for you to return with a verdict that only speaks the truth, that speaks to the evidence that you heard today, that the tail of the rat leads to one cat, the defendant. Please find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
All right, let's give them both a round of applause.
They need us to add up the numbers. We can.
All right, I think it's time for feedback. Who wants to go first?
Sorry, I almost took my mask off. I'll go first.
Yeah.
I'm William Nolan. I'm a lawyer here in Macon. I've been practicing here in Macon for about 20 years and have tried a number of cases. First, I think both of you were quite impressive and wonderful. And as far as excuse me, as far as specific things, I thought you were both very forceful and very good and handled the evidence very well. Sorry, all of a sudden I have a tickle, but I thought it was great and good job.
I'm Sherelle Lewis. I am a judge here in Bibb County at the state court. And before that, I was a prosecutor for 20 years. So let me just say I have tried real cases against real defense attorneys and didn't get closing arguments that were this well presented. So good job on that. I will say this because this is the first jury argument that I have heard since the COVID pandemic came on, because obviously we're not having jury trials right now. And just to sort of speak to the elephant in the room, you guys both did a great job despite the absolute distraction of having the mask, and the more you talk, the more it moves and whatever. And I thought, that's something that's going to be a factor, kind of going forward as lawyers try to be persuasive with half their face gone. So the fact that you didn't let that unnerve you or stop you as it was moving around was great. Your eye contact, your memorization and knowing, both of you did a great job with reasonable doubt, which is a hard thing to persuasively explain to a bunch of people who don't spend their lives in the law. So I like that. And I know that these problems are written to kind of give strengths and weaknesses to both sides. And I thought y'all both did a great job of focusing on the things that were good and making really good attempts at the parts that didn't really go your way. So, which is what you have to do in real life. So I can see how you guys made it to the finals. So good job.
All right, good evening. First of all, congratulations again. That was an awesome performance. I am a judge on the Superior Court in Clayton County. Before that, I was a prosecutor for many years for that district attorney's office and tried primarily homicides. But the most important fact, I think, is probably that I've coached mock trial for the past 18 years. So with that being said, the thing that I was the most excited about both of you is reactivity. I tell folks all the time, no matter what class I'm coaching, whether it's high school, law school, or college, what level, one thing we cannot teach is reactivity. We can teach you a lot of things. We can teach you the elements, we can teach you how to argue, but we can't teach reactivity. And so I thought that was fantastic for both of you. I echo what the other judges said about presentation. I echo what they said about content, especially with the mask. And I am certainly very excited about the 2021 spring season for Mercer mock trial and beyond. So congratulations again, and let's give them all another round of applause. All right, in a close ballot, the winner of this year's closing argument competition is Akash Patel. Congratulations. So congratulations. We will have your we will have a plaque with your name engraved on it, and I think we've got something for both of them today. She's gonna walk around and give it to him. So if you guys will stick around, we're gonna take some pictures, and congratulations again. Thank you to our judges.
And thank you everyone for coming. Are you gonna do something? You so much.